and Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of DSG Talks. I'm Mumtaz Khan, and as promised, we're back with another episode on one of my favorite topics, that is climate advocacy, how environmental laws are changing up in Pakistan. To discuss the topic, I have someone with years of experience with me. I have Mr. Rafay Alam, who's a renowned environmental lawyer. He's also the Vice President of Pakistan Environmental Law Association. He has previously served as the Chairman of Lahore Waste Management Company as well. So there could be no one better with more experience than Mr. Rafay with us. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
How are you today?
Us all is well. I'm surviving. I've managed to survive a very cold winter. And I'm quite pleased that the weather is...
It's almost heartbreaking how the winter is now going away and we have the harsh summers coming in again. Yeah. So talking about the topic that we're going to talk today, as I mentioned, that you have years of experience in environmental law, and that's just something that we have seen really in Pakistan. It's sad to say that there's lots of room in Pakistan still for the applications of environmental laws. So before we go into that, I would like to know that in your opinion, out of your expertise, what do you think that currently in Pakistan's landscape, what are the most pressing issues that our environment is facing?
Two come immediately to mind, and they have to do with water and they have to do with increasing temperatures. And they're both related, by the way. The hotter it gets, the more erratic the monsoon gets. And the more erratic it gets, the less predictable, the more intense. The rainfall that we saw in 2022, for instance, in parts of Pakistan where it normally doesn't rain, was a result of the heat waves earlier in the year.
Yeah.
So we're going to see a lot of water in the form of flooding, both riverine flooding, which is when the rivers overflow, and also flooding because of rainfall. And just a week or 10 days ago, there was an immense rainfall in Karachi, and the entire city came to a standstill. Most of the grid stations also stopped working, so there was load shedding and stuff. So you'll see flooding in rural areas, you'll see flooding in urban areas. And then with temperatures increasing, I worry very much that the human body is just not designed for some of the temperatures we're going to be facing.
Yeah, and I think it has overall disrupted, because the winters, as you mentioned, the winters we have seen this time, it has been different. There has been no rain.
No, there wasn't any rain. It's just what we're going to see, what we're already seeing actually, is an increase in the length of summers.
Yeah.
What used to be 4 or 5 months of warmth is probably going to be about 8 months of summer, and the rest of it will be basically cold and unbearable air pollution.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, air pollution, and being a Lahori, I think we have to mention the smog that we are seeing. So do you think that this has something to do with the things that we have done with the environment?
Absolutely, but first of all, I'd have to say this air pollution is not a Lahore problem.
Yeah.
If you look at satellite imagery, it has to do
the whole region.
The whole region. So it's the Indo-Gangetic Plain. It's a sort of trough between the mountains in the north and the Deccan Plateau in the south, and especially in the cold weather, the hot air doesn't rise, and a lot of the pollution that we generate through the transport sector, through energy, through industrial pollution, and then things like crop burning and brick kilns and all sort of gets trapped in this area.
Yeah.
And it's reducing lifespans throughout Pakistan and India and Bangladesh.
Definitely. We've seen people coughing all around, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons.
No, much more alarming is just this last January, there were well over 30 children who died of pneumonia here in Lahore. And now pneumonia is a respiratory disease, but it's exacerbated by air pollution. And you have to put these things together. The air pollution is literally killing people.
So as we go through that there's some of many reasons that Pakistan's environment, not even Pakistan, I would talk about globally, that we humans have done enough disrupting the overall ecosystem. So talking about what can be done on our end, being in the country. So we don't see many environmental laws being implemented or any such. So how do you think that the legislation around Pakistan has shaped up to have the necessary policies to avoid such circumstances, to help climate and to build a better ecosystems?
Well, we're pretty well laid out with environment and climate related legislation. All 4 provinces, Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Kashmir, have their own environment laws, environment acts, which essentially set up an environment protection agency as an environment regulator, and gives them primarily the responsibility to oversee industrial pollution.
Yeah.
Importantly, agriculture and agricultural pollution is not considered in environment law because pesticides are excluded from the definition of hazardous substances in our law. So if you don't have agricultural pollution that you're dealing with, you're basically dealing with industrial pollution, which is what the EPAs then tend to regulate. The environment legislation throughout Pakistan, even though the provinces and the two areas, regions have their own laws, are designed more or less the same, with every province having environment quality standards for things like how much you can pollute into water, how much you can pollute into air, even things like noise pollution and also emissions from automobiles. And if the Environment Protection Agency, either on its own volition or on someone's complaint, comes to your industrial unit and does a survey and samples the emission coming out and it's in violation of those quality standards, you can be prosecuted before an environmental tribunal, where the penalties incidentally it's a polluter pays system. So the penalty in Punjab, I think, for a violation, I think it's 5 lakhs.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So considering that there are many legislations, there are laws, but I would have to unfortunately say this, that in Pakistan we have laws for lots of things, but do you think that accountability is there?
Well, it's not a question of accountability. I also say beyond the environment quality standards, there are environmental approvals that need to be gotten. And as you know, setting up solar now, the new environmental regulations, the environmental approval regulations in Punjab require even solar projects to carry out an environment assessment and approval before they can be carried out. So there's a long list of projects under the law that require an environment assessment, which means that the proponent of the project has to carry out a study to find out how much and where their project is going to cause an adverse environment impact. And where it will cause an adverse environment impact, these assessments have to gauge how to either prevent that impact, mitigate it, and if you can't do either, how to compensate the people for the impact to their environment or the detriment to their environment. And so that's the entire process of these environmental impact assessments and initial environmental examinations, and they're supposed to make these projects sustainable from the get-go. But the issue is really not one of implementation. It actually has to do with capacity. There's well over 60,000 industrial units in Punjab, right? And the total staff of the Environment Protection Agency is less than 1,000. It's just not geared up.
Putting in more in that.
Yeah, it's just not geared up to the responsibilities it's been handed over. You know, the Environment Protection Agency in Punjab, even the one in Sindh that I've seen and the one in KP, doesn't have monitoring equipment and testing equipment available to it so that it can go to a unit and carry out the tests that will prove that there's some sort of contravention.
It's exactly like most of the things in Pakistan, that it's more on the papers and it's less in the practicality.
नहीं, सड़कों के लिए अरबों रुपए हैं. You know, यहाँ you can get from here to phase 6 signal free in Lahore, and the caretaker government spent close to 10 billion rupees on infrastructure connecting Gulberg to DHA.
Just the thing is that when we'll be going to phase 6, you'll be just looking at lots of smog and
lots of smog, and so, you know, cleaning the air takes a while, cleaning the environment takes a while, and it's not the sort of thing that gets politicians elected so far in Pakistan. Surprisingly, things like buses, overpasses, underpasses, well, I mean, I don't mean to be facetious, but also energy, things like building schools and hospitals get politicians elected. But a clean environment, it should be on the manifestos and agenda of all the political parties. But we've just had an election where I saw very few politicians talking about the environment. It should be, I mean, given the air pollution, the severity of the air pollution in the country, this should be something that people should be fighting on every single day, but we don't hear it at all.
Exactly. And I don't know if I should mention such a political thing or not, but if we are hearing things like ज़्यादा बारिश आती है तो ज़्यादा पानी आता है, but nobody is talking about कि ज़्यादा बारिश आती क्यों है और आने वाली क्यों है, or are we even ready to take it up? So we can just only hope that in future we can see more coming up. So on the similar topic, I would like to ask that we were having the discussion earlier as well, that in Pakistan we also don't have much of education around the topic. Environment is still such a thing which is considered to be that it is something superficial, it is something in the books only. Similar goes for environmental law. So how do you see the future shaping up for that? Do you think that the new youth is finally coming towards that? We're going to see a Pakistan?
Well, first of all, I won't be as skeptical as you, because I've traveled around Pakistan. In different parts of Pakistan, people have a very different connection to their environment. Because we live in such a big city, cities have a tendency of separating its residents from the environment outside. But if you go to the hills, if you go to the mountains, if you're in Hunza, for example, people are extremely sensitive to the environment. If you go into rural areas in Punjab or in Sindh, you'll find people who are extremely sensitive to the environment, to the cleanliness of the water and the air, and the produce of their fields, which is intimately connected to this. So I find that there is a great sympathy for the environment throughout Pakistan, but also at the same time, a huge change in appreciation and understanding is taking place. When I started focusing on environmental law over a decade ago, and there were very few professionals in Pakistan trained on environmental issues. But now, fast forward with the help of the HEC and syllabuses on environment at universities, there are people who are not just studying environmental sciences, but who have practiced environmental management after getting a degree and have several years of experience behind them. Their understanding of Pakistan's environmental issues is very, very contextualized, very intimate, very accurate. And similarly, there is, a change in curriculums throughout Pakistan, especially in private universities. People are very sensitive about teaching environmental issues to students at a very young age, and increasingly so in government schools as well. I'm part of a group called the Lahore Biennale Foundation, which did a pilot project with 14 government schools last year, a whole green curriculum. So over the course of 3 months, first we taught teachers how to teach the curriculum, and this was with help of WWF and the Lums School of Education helped design a course for the teachers, and the teachers then taught kids from the age of 5 to the age of 14 for 3 months on things like recycling, air pollution, climate change, waste management, and just contextualizing them to their own environment. And it was remarkably successful, so much that the government of Punjab wants to scale it up to all of Lahore and potentially even all of Punjab.
Wonderful. Great to know that change is finally happening and we are looking at a future where people are finally coming towards it. So I think that things will better up in the environment as well.
There is also this perception that, as you said, now there's this lack of awareness that people think environment is a sort of it's a luxury you afford after a certain amount of economic development. But the history of environmental activism around the world is one of especially civil society objecting to industrial pollution excess everywhere. So it's not that countries reached a certain stage of economic development and then chose to become environmentally friendly. It's that while industrialists and economic activity were literally destroying the environment, civil society came and said, no, you can't do this. Change the law, change practices, and then over time we've seen throughout the world, there's so many examples of how sustainable practices and resource efficiency has come into the market and has been successful.
Definitely. So I think that we will take notes from the people and the examples around. As you said, that it has to go hand in hand. So you move around this chain of whole Punjab where you see all these industries and you see all these steam and all these gases coming out. And I see very few of them still. There's lots and lots of potentials in Pakistan. For example, if you talk about green energy for industries, I was just reading a study and it was somewhere like that. We have a potential, if Pakistan wants to shift to green energy, we have a potential of moving it to 85%. And we're right now standing at 5%. So I think there's a long way to go there.
No, it is. And look, the Stone Age didn't come to an end because we ran out of stone. It's remarkable to me that solar and wind energy is cheaper than all other forms of energy in Pakistan across the board, even coal-fired and hydel, if you think about it. And yet we still commit to these long-term IPP contracts that force us to pay capacity charges to fossil fuel-based power producers and can't get out of it. When in the reality is that the sustainable solution, it's no longer a question of the sustainable solution not being in the market. Actors like DSG show that there is enough inventory in Pakistan for this transition to take place.
Definitely.
But like I said, the Stone Age didn't come to an end because we ran out of stones. There are forces resisting this transition. And I think there's no particular coordinated plan of resistance. I think it comes, for example, the distribution companies in Pakistan, which should be promoting solar, won't, because their business plans are operating on a monopoly. They monopolize the area in which they provide electricity, and so for them, renewable energies like solar and wind, when installed, actually eat away at their business plan. And so as an entity, as a business entity, it will resist the solarization of its customers. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Then we also have the capacity payments, and it's interesting to note that solar has been so successful in Pakistan that it has the rise of solar in the last 3-4 years has been the uptick has been so dramatic that the government of Pakistan is buying less and less electricity from the IPPs and is forced to pay capacity charges to it, which is another reason why there's a resistance to the transition. These two things need to be addressed by political forces. I remember when I was on the board of LESCO over a decade ago, when I bought my first solar unit and was trying to argue with the senior management at LESCO to try and do something about increased solarization. I even went and spoke to some banks to see if they would finance things. Because it makes sense now, it made sense then as well. And was continually rebuffed. I kept on telling them things like you could have wheeling arrangements, you could have when LESCO pays you back for electricity. What's the term used?
Net metering.
Net metering.
Yeah.
I literally laughed at the suggestion of net metering. But then a few years later, after I'd left the board of LESCO, during the Muslim League government, I don't know who, I think it was Miftah Ismail, who as a political entity said no, and he forced the distribution companies to have net metering.
Yeah.
So unless these sorts of institutional resistances to a transition to renewables have to be overcome by leadership, by political leadership.
Definitely, and as you see that it's going to increase over the time. We saw the resistance over the net metering charges as well, with the tariff they were paying. The last chairman Nepra, he also talked about that, how they are not going to change it just so that more and more people would come. And as you were talking about the distribution company, so I'm very glad to see that every time I pass through that Sahiwal chain and I see that big thermal power plant with all the gases coming out, it hurts my heart to see that we have invested so much amount into something that's very harming. But I'm so glad to see that now finally we're coming towards project like CTBCM. So I hope that it finally gets to some point and we see that plant installed in, but there's always room for more. So looking at that, we can just hope that the new government coming in would be looking at more and more good policies.
Well, we have, for instance, a climate policy in Pakistan that was first approved in 2012 and recently updated in 2021.
Yeah.
And under the United Nations sort of climate arrangement, under the Paris Agreement specifically, Pakistan submitted something called a nationally determined contribution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, where it said that it wants to move to 60% renewables by 2030, and that it wants to reduce its emissions, I think, forget exactly, by about 50% by 2030. 15% on our own financing, but the other 35% of that 50 would have to be through international financing. So there is a plan in place at the climate policy level to see a transition to renewables, also to improve energy efficiency as well, to reduce demand. But this is costly. There are estimates put in by the World Bank and the government of Pakistan that this renewable transition will cost in excess of $100 billion. Now, I've seen that written down on paper, but I'm beginning to become increasingly suspect of that figure because...
increasing prices and everything.
Well, I mean, when the World Bank tells you a figure that's going to cost you this much, you do remember that they're a bank trying to give you a loan. And it might not be $100 billion, it might be much less. So,
and then there comes the limitations of Pakistan as well, as we are one of those countries who are not manufacturing the solar panels as well, which is one of the most important things. And then we have the things such as LC closures, everything.
And dollar going up, and then that changing the price of things. And what is the potential for manufacturing solar in Pakistan? Do we have the raw materials?
We do have, and now I've heard that there are other parties coming in who are going to set up solar plants. So I think the assembling is going to start in a few years, and then we're going to look at the manufacturing part. The big reason for that is that the other countries are not ready to invest right now in Pakistan due to our economic conditions. Otherwise, we have players like China who could easily come in and put up a plant here. But
they will. And one of the reasons why the plant in Sahiwal, that coal-fired plant, was built was because there was a energy crisis between 2010 and 13. The 2013 election mandate was really one of energy supply increase, if you think about it. And the government that came in, that was voted in, the PMLN government, worked on that mandate and increased Pakistan's energy production essentially through...
We have seen the change in the load shedding. We have seen terrible load shedding in previous.
I remember I was on the board of LESCO during the load shedding. It was quite difficult to go out socially.
So on the other hand, while we're talking about industry revolutionization and all of that, and you are saying that there are some laws out there, do you think that there have to be some laws where the government tells the industry that there has to be a portion of renewable energy in your energy mixes? Do you think that it should be there?
As far as laws are concerned, you can pass a law to do that if you want. I mean, we have plenty of silly laws like that in Pakistan. Requiring it, I mean, it's this institutional resistance that we just need to overcome, because businesses themselves now increasingly see that renewable energies are a straightforward investment.
Definitely.
And as I was learning earlier, the State Bank has financing for solar projects as well, and the return, or you can pay back the loan.
Payback with the increasing electricity prices. I was just having a talk with the increasing electricity prices. The paybacks have come back to half of what they were. So they were 4 years. They're now 2 years for most of the plants.
And I find it interesting, amusing, frustrating that we keep on signing these IPP contracts, but because in the age of climate change, in the age of where burning fossil fuels should be looked at as almost a criminal act, because of what's going to happen, what is happening to the future of this planet. In a country like Pakistan, where we have a long tradition of cancelling contracts on the grounds of things like fraud or corruption. Now, fraud and corruption void contractual agreements because they are contracts that are made against public policy. That is the overarching jurisprudence as to why a fraudulent contract will be voided. But I think having a contract based on fossil fuel energy is also against public policy.
Definitely.
And it should also face the same consequences that a contract arranged out of fraud would as well.
That's going to be
an interesting sort of, I keep on thinking about this. One day I'll file a case against the IPPs, one day I'll file a case against the IPPs and get this discussion off the ground.
Yeah. So looking forward that there are going to be such revolutions coming in Pakistan, and I think they're the need of the hour, considering what has already happened, and I don't think so we have much time against that. So another topic when we come about environment and all the disruptions, so that's the waste management. And since you have years and years in that as well, so I'd like to hear a word on that as well. Do you think we're doing enough in Pakistan for that, as they emit lots of gases as well?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I mean, we have 2 landfills in Lahore. One has been decommissioned, that's the Mahmood Booty landfill. And now there's a landfill in Lakhotay that's being used. But I've seen United Nations Environment Programme satellite imagery of methane emissions captured by satellite in space coming from the Mahmood Booty dump site. So, I mean, that methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, and we need to do something about it. But here's the thing I've learned about, especially waste management in Lahore. Lahore produces, and this is about it, produces more than 6,000 tons of waste a day. That's how much that goes to the landfill every single day.
And what's the process do we have? Do we have enough right things to do with that waste, or is it?
Then we have 2 things. There is a composting plant by the landfill where organic material can be removed and settled so that compost can be made and used for agriculture. But for reasons that really are more to do with management than anything else, that composting plant hasn't really gotten off the ground ever. And on the other hand, essentially the waste management company is picking trash up from your homes and taking it to the landfill. But in between, we have a vast network, many tens of thousands of individuals involved in informal waste collection. This is what we call the informal sector. And so the landfill itself, we realized, does not receive any glass, it doesn't receive any metal, it doesn't receive any newspapers. Because all of these elements go through the informal cycle, who then collect, aggregate. Even PET bottles don't get to the landfill. They're collected together, they're aggregated, sold by the kilo, and then cut up into pieces and reprocessed into the opaque plastic kitchen utensils that we see in our markets. So there is already a huge informal recycling system taking place in Lahore and cities like Karachi and Islamabad that should not be discounted, but actually should be supported, because these people are providing a vital service, not just to the city, but also to maintain the landfills, because all that extra material, things like PET bottles, glass, and so on, if it goes to the landfill, it reduces the lifespan of the landfill because you're filling it up more quickly. But if you go outside Lahore, for the rest of Punjab, you take all of Punjab's other big cities, Faisalabad, Gujranwala, Rawalpindi, Multan, put them all together, they don't produce more than 3,000 tons of waste a day. So thinking of Punjab or Pakistan's waste management issues and conflating them with Lahore's challenges, I think is incorrect. 6,000 tons of waste a day requires, as it does, 13 to 15,000 people working 2 shifts and, over 1,000 trucks and cars that pick this trash up and do this. But if you go to Sialkot, for instance, which doesn't produce more than 1,000 tons a day, all right, give me 20 trucks, 500 people, and I can clean the streets. It's not impossible. It's very, very doable.
Exactly.
So waste management is something, again, it's an example of political leadership. There was the waste management company was formed in the PML government under Shahbaz Sharif, who then supported its activities. And we had
because we've seen the difference between something in Lahore regarding that, and then we come to an entirely different image that is Karachi, which has improved now, but still.
Karachi doesn't have a landfill. Karachi is more than twice the size of Lahore. It produces well over 10,000 tons of waste a day, but there's no place to put it. So, जो भी कूड़ा इकट्ठा होता है, वो trucks में जाकर वो कराची से बाहर, they find some place where जहाँ कोई है नहीं, and they start dumping it over there until people start complaining, and then they find another place and they start dumping it over there, or it just goes into the sea.
I think this dumping is such a big issue. I was just the other day going to the GT Road area, and I saw a big mountain, a heap of all those garbage. And I asked my driver, I was like, why is it there? And he mentioned that it is the government or something, someone collected it, it was going to be sold to someone for for recycling purpose, but it just never got done, so it just lies there. So there are many such issues overall in Pakistan regarding the waste management, and I think they need to be catered to in order to stop the idea of those gases.
But it is doable. I think the other thing with Lahore, you're picking up 6,000 tons. Nobody in Lahore pays a waste management fee.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, for some reason, I mean, that's a lack of awareness. You want a clean environment, you got to pay for it. It's not going to be free, especially for a city this large and with its consumer habits the way they are. I mean, if you're going to be buying stuff, eating chips and things or colas and things like that, you're going to be producing plastic. You're going to be disposing of it. And so, करना पड़ेगा कुछ.
Yeah, that's what we get to after discussing all of the things. करना तो पड़ेगा कुछ. So lastly, it has been overall a very interesting discussion. So I'd like to have your final view on that. That what do you think, that where are we in our environmental laws and all such laws which support the overall climate advocacy? Where are we right now, and where do you see us going in, let's say, coming 5 years, and what needs to be done?
Look, let me try and focus on something. Like I mentioned, we have environment laws, we have a climate policy, we have a federal climate policy. And the federal climate policy makes lots of sense. We've got our national determined contributions where we're going to be going to renewable, provided we get the financing to do so. We have an environment law that requires environmental approvals and maintaining quality standards and so on and so forth. The challenge really is that while these documents exist, especially the federal climate change policy, if you look at what's happening in the provinces, or if you come down and see what's happening in the cities, it's completely the opposite.
Yeah.
These, especially the policies, have to be localized.
Okay.
We can't have a federal climate policy because Pakistan is too varied an environment for a single policy to work. For example, if it rains in Sialkot, it floods differently than when it rains in Lahore. Right, and the monsoon flooding in North Punjab is very different from flooding in South Punjab. You've got to have these local policies that understand how the local environment is being impacted. And then, beyond that, what we need are enough political stability that our elected representatives go and do the jobs that we voted them in for. Most of the time, or at least in the last 10 years, our elected representatives have essentially been fighting off charges of corruption, none of which were ever really proven anywhere, and fighting for their lives essentially, distracted from their real job. A lot of Pakistan's environment and climate related issues stem from the fact that we have political instability.
Yeah.
You have political stability, you'll have better application of environmental and climate policies. You'll see decentralization of them, so much so that, we're talking a big game about reducing air pollution, but dusri taraf, if you look at the big cities, all we're doing in our big cities is building overpasses and underpasses for automobiles.
Yeah.
So there's a disconnect between what the policy says at the federal level and what people at the local level.
And we've seen crazy increase in the automobiles.
But we've got to change the way our local governments work. We don't have elected local governments. Cities are run by unelected bureaucrats, and they don't represent the will of the people. We need to have local government. We need to have sustained democracy in Pakistan if we want to see these policies really work.
Definitely, very well said. So I think that's a system that's going to change, and it cannot happen overnight. So lastly, if you can give some message to the people watching, as I always say that we Pakistanis are obsessed with the idea of always questioning the policies and the government and the authorities, but I think that there's always something that you can do on a personal and a local level. So regarding that, what would you like to say to the people?
Well, the thing with air pollution, for example, or with climate change, there's nothing you can do at a private level. If you want to reduce air pollution, you have to change the way we consume we produce electricity. That can't be done individually. That has to be done through government policy.
But it can be consumed, and people can, on personal level, change to more sustainable practices.
It won't scale up big enough. It has to be a social, collective, political action. Pakistan and Pakistani cities aren't the first places on earth that have suffered adverse environmental impacts from industrial pollution. Many other places have and have overcome them. We see cities not just in Europe and the United States. We see cities, less developed countries like Mexico. We see South Africa. We see China making sustained progress towards more sustainable sort of business practices. And that is only possible where there is a civil society in place that has a shared vision of a cleaner future that's more sustainable than the 5-year election cycle. Because cleaning places up, cleaning the water, cleaning the air, moving to renewable energies isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to take 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And you need to have a vision that can hold that long beyond the 5-year process. And then you will see results.
Definitely. So I think that what I infer from that is that the only thing we can do right now is raise voice for that and ask the authorities to imply on that. So thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an insightful discussion. And for the people watching, I think let's, as I say in DSG Talks also, that let's keep talking green because the more you talk about it, the more we can reach to a conclusion, to something that will revolutionize the system. So thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with another episode very soon. Allah Hafiz.